Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Sunday with the Braid into our program, Antisemitism, the Endless Drama. My name is Daphna Scholl. I am your Zoom master for today's event. Moderating today is Lisa Rosenbaum, who wrote Stories from the Violins of Hope, the theatrical presentation about Holocaust-era violins, which the Braid produced, and many of you may have seen. She's also the author of the award-winning novel, A Day of Small Beginnings, which wrestles with the subject of anti-Semitism and Jewish identity. Her guest today is Rick Hirschhaut, director of the American Jewish Committee in LA. So we'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so please put that in the chat now. And before we begin, I have a few technical reminders. Your audio function is muted, and that is just to ensure we don't have any accidental interruptions during our conversation today. If you would like to use the closed captioning function, you can hit the CC button at the bottom and text will pop up and you can enlarge it and move it around the screen to your liking. This event is being recorded and will be available later on in the week. So please just stay tuned and you can check out our website soon if you want to watch the event again, or if you'd like to share it with friends and family. Lastly, we will be having a Q&A at the end, so please feel free to chat me any questions that you have for Rick, and I will be fielding those and get to as many as I possibly can. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, Lisa Rosenbaum. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Daphna. Thank you. And hello, everyone. Welcome to Sunday with the Braid. I first reached out to Rick Hirschhaut to have a conversation about anti-Semitism before the October 7th attacks. Now in the shadow of all that has happened in Israel and really terrible and shocking repercussions it's had on American Jews, this conversation, unfortunately, has a new urgency. And so it's really my honor to be able to speak to someone who has special insight into the subject of anti-Semitism. Rick Hirschhaut has been, he is now the director of the American Jewish Committee in Los Angeles, but he's had a 30-year career in civil rights, humanitarianism, and Jewish communal advocacy across the United States. He's had senior positions at the Anti-Defamation League, with the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, the American Friends of Rambam Medical Center, and notably the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, which he helped to create, and he was its founding executive director. Throughout his career, Rick has built bridges between the Jewish community and the African American community in particular, and with law enforcement to combat anti-Semitism and extremism. It's quite a resume. But before we meet Rick himself, it is our tradition to open these programs with a dramatic performance because we are a theater company. And today we begin with a poem by Marge Piercy, which is about the Jewish people from a Jewish perspective. Directed by the Braid producing director, Susan Morgenstern. Veteran Braid actors Kate Zental performs Magid.
The courage to let go of the door, the handle. The courage to shed the familiar. The courage to abandon the graves dug into the hill. The courage to desert the tree planted and only begun to bear. The courage to leave the place whose language you learned as early as your own. The courage to walk out of the pain that is known into the pain that cannot be imagined. Stuffed in the stinking hold of a rotting ship sailing off the map into dragons' mouths. Cathay, India, Siberia, the Golden Medina, leaving bodies by the way like abandoned treasure. So they walked out of Egypt. So they bribed their way out of Russia under loads of straw. So they steamed out of the bloody, smoking charnel house of Europe on overloaded freighters forbidden all ports. Out of pain into death or freedom or a different painful dignity. into squalor and politics. We Jews are all born wanderers with shoes under our pillows and a memory of blood that is ours falling down. We honor those Jews who changed, those who chose the desert over bondage, who walked into the strange and became strangers, and gave birth to children who could look down on them, standing on their shoulders for having been slaves. We honor those who let go of everything but freedom, who ran, who revolted, who fought, who became other by saving themselves.
How about Kate? That was beautiful. And welcome, Rick. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be with you. And Kate, that was deeply, deeply moving. What a remarkable way to begin this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. I chose the Marge Piercy poem to open our conversation because it seems to suggest that Jewish survival is a collective act of courage in the face of anti-Semitism, which has been called the oldest hatred. And I just want to ask you a question I've been hearing a lot lately. Briefly, why do they hate us?
Wow. It's complicated, like many questions that try to get to the heart of the world's oldest and most enduring hatred. Anti-Semitism certainly is shape-shifting to the times. We've seen it throughout our history. We are and always have been the people of the book. We have believed in one God and been loyal servants to that one God. And we were the people of the book before most of the world even knew how to read. And that predated Christianity. And of course, the Christian roots of anti-Semitism and their antecedents continue to color our world, notwithstanding tremendous progress and strides that have been made, particularly with the Second Vatican Council's renunciation in 1965 of the long-held deicide charge against the Jews and the teaching of contempt that followed it. Fundamentally, anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory, and it looks to this notion that there is some dark, mysterious, unseen to the naked eye force that is controlling events in the world. This was the underpinning of the infamous Tsarist forgery, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that we have continued to see crop up in places around the world. And it endures today, that for what can't be explained, or for what people fear, or what they don't know, the Jew, the other, become easy scapegoats, and those for whom blame should be affixed. That's the best I can give you.
It's a lot.
Literally on one foot.
Okay, I think most of us appreciate that at least we have an American Constitution that explicitly guarantees freedom of religion and prohibits anti-Jewish laws that certainly were seen in Europe for centuries. But still, the Jewish community historically has felt a need to create institutions to represent us to the American public at large. Can you talk a little bit about the American Jewish Committee's work, and particularly in response to anti-Semitism?
Of course. So AJC is, in fact, one of the legacy organizations in the American Jewish community. We're the older sibling by 7 years of the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. And we were created at a time in American life when anti-Semitism was raw and crude It was not uncommon to see signs posted publicly at various establishments: no dogs, no Jews. Vaudeville back in the day was rife with grotesque caricatures and portrayals of Jews in the world. But really what led to the formation of AJC was anti-Semitism overseas, were pogroms in Kishinev in the former Soviet Union, and a plea for help, a plea for support. And so AJC was created out of that sense of global anti-Semitism before we probably even knew what to call it. And we have consistently persisted through the decades to be that source of light, to work for the passage of civil rights legislation, to deal with issues of extremism and move those manifestations to the margins of American society. But again, anti-Semitism persists. In its most recent iteration, and in terms of our most recent advocacy, we were very proud to be among the architects of the U.S. national strategy to confront and combat anti-Semitism, what's known as the White House Action Plan, that was announced by President Biden just 8 months ago, and really entails a whole of government response in very serious, tangible ways, more than 200 concrete, practical steps that must be implemented across the federal system and amplified and mirrored across state and local systems. And so this is our calling card. This was a document in formation well before October 7th, but to your point, Lisa, takes on even greater urgency when it comes to confronting hate and confronting the anti-Israel invective that fundamentally is anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I think, because right now, I think American Jews are deeply, deeply frightened by a perception of growing intolerance and violence against Jews that some of us have just never seen before. And there's this sense that the restraints are loosening that were in place since the Holocaust. The shame is loosening in a sense. And it's just, it's resurfacing into American mainstream society. I hear many people saying they're uncomfortable being publicly Jewish. They're taking off Stars of David. They're taking mezuzahs off their doors. Even I've heard stories of people withdrawing their children from schools where their kids are being bullied, Jewish events, going to synagogue. And then there's everything, as you mentioned, that's going on in the college campuses, which is a whole discussion unto itself. But are we overreacting, or has something really changed?
I don't think in any way we are overreacting, and the statistics, the data bears it out. AJC will release our annual survey of perceptions and attitudes about anti-Semitism among American Jews and among the general public. We'll do this in mid-February, and the numbers that we've already seen are staggering. In terms of the number of incidents, the FBI has reported a tremendous spike in hate crimes, and some 60% of all religiously based hate crimes in America that the Bureau has tracked and documented are targeting the Jewish community. We have seen a 100-fold percentage increase, multiple 100-fold percentage increase in the number of incidents since October 7th. There's a sense of open season on the Jewish community, so-called swatting incidents, which effectively are bomb threats called into Jewish institutions. Over one weekend around the New Year, there were more than 100 such swatting incidents in Los Angeles alone. 5 years ago, if there was a bomb threat directed against a house of worship, we would be understandably upset and alarmed. Multiply that by that exponential factor that I've just shared. That is unfortunately the new normal in America. And our job, our role as a Jewish community, not just the advocacy organizations, but each and one of us, rank and file members of the community, this is a moment of truth. Certainly, some have thought twice, understandably, about wearing and identifying publicly as Jews out in the street, out in the community. At the same time, there are many who have said, I think I'm going to begin to wear the kippah. I think I'm going to put my kids in a Jewish day school. I'm going to loudly and proudly express my Jewish identity because I believe fundamentally in the goodness and the protections that American democracy have afforded our community for 350 plus years. And I think fundamentally, we have to have that faith. We have to double down in our belief in the security and the protection that law enforcement agencies afford. We work closely with law enforcement agencies, as does the ADL, to build those relationships, to make sure that there is sensitivity and understanding and appreciation of what constitutes anti-Semitism. And increasingly, these need not be episodes that rise to a level of criminality, because what's most important is that we, as best we can, try to nip this in the bud in its earliest stages. So even episodes that may not be illegal, but are nonetheless unwelcome and offensive and indecent, need to be documented, need to be shared with our friends in law enforcement, and we have to really lean in to all the goodness that this golden Medina, the United States of America, has afforded our community for generations.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just wondering, you mentioned this report that was given, you worked with the Biden administration. What are some of the specific of the suggestions of what the Jewish community can do, or what the government can do? What's in that report?
Sure,
Yeah.
it's fascinating, and again, it is a whole of government response. So the Department of Agriculture, one might say, Nachamol, is involved in this implementation, and that has to do with kosher food. It has to do with providing access to information about the Jewish community in rural parts of the United States where someone may not have ever met a Jewish person. The Department of Education, of course, is an obvious plank of the report, and providing training on anti-Semitism. The Department of Justice, beefing up the penalties for crimes of hate. Across the board, even the Small Business Administration, with whom AJC has formed a partnership because so many of these mom and pop bodega type stores are targeted for attack. And this isn't just anti-Semitism. This is also those who target Muslims in America. And I should make very clear that the White House Action Plan, the U.S. National Strategy, covers both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, as it properly should. And so that's just an inkling of what is contained in this report. It's very granular. It is available on the U.S. government websites. It's certainly available on the AJC website as well.
It's great. Yeah, because there's often a very fine line. Like we have, everything that's going on on social media these days. It's become this very toxic environment where you have this constant balancing between First Amendment speech freedoms and hate speech, and where do you draw that line? And how does AJC suggest or think about minimizing the effect of anti-Semitic speech in that forum?
Well, you're absolutely right, Lisa, about the toxic and really exponential impact of one hateful tweet. And call to mind, I won't mention his name more than once today, but somebody like Kanye West, when he tweets out about going DEFCON 4 against the Jewish world, the Jewish community, the Jewish people, he is reaching with that singular, ugly message more than 3 times the number of Jews that there are on the planet. And that's the power of his platform. The challenge is to try to push back with positive speech. What comes to mind is even the influencer, which is a term we should all be familiar with, increasingly so. Kylie Jenner, within hours of the October 7 Hamas terror attack, tweeted out to her 350 million followers, her heartfelt sorrow for what had taken place. But within an hour, she was the target of such hateful, ugly, rancorous invective directed toward her that she pulled that tweet down. And so we have to do all we can to uplift and support those with a positive message, but it's more than that as well. The tech companies, who really are the foundational source of these platforms, need to be held to account. We supported an important piece of legislation in California that passed last year that holds proverbially their feet to the fire, that every social media company doing business in the state of California, and we're looking obviously more to Northern California, must disclose its policies on hate speech, simply asking for transparency, not asking that the policy be buttressed or articulated in any specific way, but simply that it exists and that it be shared with their audience. And even on that point, we get pushback. And so it speaks to the severity of the challenge. The social media universe is a very, very difficult battle front for us. And as much as one might say it's a lot of hot air, it's a lot of mishigas, the truth is it reaches too many people and may be the seeding of some ugly ideas that ultimately cause a lone wolf or somebody with other social pathologies to want to act on what they read and see.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, one person's opinion is another person's hate speech, and who is the one to decide where that line is? And you're asking the social media companies to be the decider. That gets kind of rough too. I don't know how that's going to be resolved. But yeah, I can see. I mean, the other thing is, you mentioned the Jenner example. There seems to be, for many of us, the silence from our allies, especially a lack of empathy about the October 7th attacks, and especially the well-documented sexual violence against Israeli women. It's particularly painful to the Jewish people to see this lack of empathy. And especially, I have to say, as someone who grew up, actively supporting civil rights movements of other minorities, you've been building bridges for your whole career with other communities. And I wonder if you could just share with us your sense, have our allies abandoned us?
I would say that in the aftermath of October 7th, writ large, we have not heard enough from our traditional allies. And some have been far too silent. Too many have conflated their views of the Israeli government before October 7th with somehow justifying the horrific barbarity of the Hamas attack. And for some of our allies, it speaks to an ignorance that belies a simple or a fundamental lack of understanding or appreciation of the threat of Hamas. And I personally am trying to push back on this message as much as I possibly can. Hamas is the ISIS of our time. And when put in that context, many Americans will understand it because it will evoke the memories of those horrific videos, the beheadings that took place a decade or so ago. That's the level of depravity and barbarity and hate that is Hamas. That is something altogether different from what ultimately, hopefully, will be a peaceful resolution of the decades-old Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I think those two realities have become conflated and muddled in too many people's minds, and it has led to a deafening silence among many of our friends. We, I think, have a right to expect better for having marched with them, for having walked in those social justice protests following the horrific, brutal murder of George Floyd. We have to, I think we have to reach out to our friends and help convey to them the deep pain, the profound pain that we are feeling at this moment. Some of them need that nudge and that prod. Others don't. I have a very dear friend in the Japanese American community who, within days of the attack, reached out to me just before the Shabbat that followed and said, "Rick, wherever you're going this evening, I want to come with you." And as it so happened, we were actually we promised our wonderful Chabad rabbi neighbor across the street that we would be going to Chabad. So I had to explain this to my friend, that this might be a little bit different than what you're accustomed to. And it was a remarkable evening of allyship and solidarity. And so I do think we have to be careful not to paint with too broad a brush when we talk about our allies, but writ large, it has been too quiet, and it's not too late for us to reach out and embrace our friends and say to them, this is a moment where we need you, and let us explain why.
Yeah. I just wondered, does AJC have a particular program for what's going on the college campuses? Because that, I mean, obviously that's almost a subject unto itself. We could talk for an hour at least about that, but I'm just wondering what your position is about college campus.
We do work on the campuses. We work with many partner organizations, and we view Hillel and the Hillel student organizations as really the lead. They live on campus. The relationships with students, with faculty are fundamentally their wheelhouse, and we do our best to provide support and guidance and allyship without getting in the way. And I think that's just an important credo to adopt, and a way of operating. We have some real surus on the college campuses today. What we witnessed with the three presidents testifying was as tone deaf and blind to the day-to-day realities for students on a campus a moment as we ever could have seen. They were all briefed by brilliant attorneys. They were instructed on how to walk that fine line of free speech and what is appropriate and permissible on a campus and what is not. But in the exchange, the humanity was lost. It is unimaginable for so many students on campus today to feel safe and to be able to walk to class without being heckled, to be able to take a class, perhaps in Israel studies or Hebrew, without being heckled or harassed by other students or other professors, frankly. One of the revelations, I think, and the splash of cold water in the face that we've all come to understand in this time is that for far too long, and with the notion of tenure, which is sacrosanct, that principle of once someone reaches a certain threshold of service on a campus, an academic, they can't be touched. And that has given license to far too many to become polemicists, to become inciters of their students. That's inciters with a C. And it has led to a toxic environment on campus. We have to push back. There's nothing like the threat of a donor or an alumni network suggesting or threatening straight up that they may withhold support. There's nothing like that to motivate an administration to hold that mirror up to itself and to do what it needs to do to right the ship on a college campus. But I have had many, many parents in recent weeks come up to me and ask about campus A or campus B, or where's a safe place for my kid to be applying to? And it's a fair question, unfortunately. Hopefully, many campuses, many of which are now under federal investigation, more than a dozen because of their climate, will wake up without having to go through that public embarrassment and ridicule that the three presidents who testified had to endure. That should be a wake-up call to all.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of wonder whether you're getting through to some of these people, whether in the administration or on the faculty, about why there's so much concern, rather than just simply threatening them with, withdrawing funds, which is certainly powerful. But, I sort of wonder, why aren't they getting the point that this is truly threatening to people for no good reason at all?
Well, again, I do think it comes down to, and I should say the threat isn't usually the first volley that's thrown. There's
Yeah.
usually an attempt to engage with administration, and ultimately, when a donor suggests or threatens to pull their support, it's usually because of absolute frustration and not being able to get the point across. To your point, I think for many, the campus understandably is seen as a place of the ultimate town square and center for free speech and speech of all kinds. And for decades, going back to the 60s and beyond, it served that purpose.
Yeah.
But what has happened, unfortunately, is the arrival of cancel culture and this notion that if someone is pro-Israel, went on a birthright experience, participates in Hillel, they are somehow canceled out from any other activities on a campus. They somehow are no longer welcome at the environmental club or in some other social justice forum. And that is a reflection of narrow-mindedness and closed-mindedness, and exactly the opposite of what we hope the experience will be for our kids, for all kids on a college campus, that last way station before they get into the real world and have to interact with people of all backgrounds.
Yeah. It's funny because, the shutting down is a kind of authoritarianism, which is exactly the opposite of what they think they're doing. I just kind of wonder, from your perspective as a longtime professional in the field, if you think that the presence of Jews in the public forum, in entertainment, in films, in theater, on television, has had much of an impact on the non-Jewish American public, especially people who have not had much contact with Jews, in presenting us to the public and maybe promoting more understanding of who we are as a people. Has that had any impact?
Oh, I think it's had a remarkable impact. The challenge is it's sometimes not so apparent, and it's a little bit subtle. If you think of a show that could not be more quintessentially Jewish in so many ways than Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm, to many in the larger world, they may not fully appreciate that's a reflection of Jewish experience. That's Yiddishkeit coming forward. I do think we've had, unfortunately, too much of a one-dimensional characterization and portrayal of Jews in media, in television, and sometimes in film. And we're beginning to at least pierce that veneer and present more complex characters. It was just 11 days after the October 7 attack that Variety magazine, the trade publication, convened a full-day conference on Hollywood and anti-Semitism. Now, the planning of this conference didn't begin on October 8th. It began last June, but it took on a whole different patina and orientation in the aftermath of October 7. And there were some remarkable presentations that took place that day. And I think the takeaway overall was we have an opportunity now to more proudly and in a more nuanced and more robust way, present the whole of the Jewish experience through media, through film, through television. And I was struck in a morning keynote presentation when the actor Juliana Margulies was interviewed by the editor of Variety and spoke about her character on The Morning Show. It's a great show if you haven't watched it. And her character, and just the way her character was created, wears a cross on her chest. And Juliana reflected and said, you know what? If I had to do this over again, it would be a Star of David. Why didn't I go down that road? And so I think this is a moment, a bit
Because she got canceled.
Well, a bit of an epiphany for performers, that this is a time when we need to be coming forward and helping the rest of America understand the fundamental role that Jews have had in shaping entertainment. Look, the Academy Museum, located about a mile from where I live, is a remarkable institution, and they got it wrong initially in their permanent exhibition. That somehow, in creating an institution that looked at the history of Hollywood, the Jewish contribution to Hollywood was minimized or ignored. They have since fixed it. And I think that bit of fixing is a lot of what we need to be doing going forward.
Yeah, we need to not be shy about saying who we are. I'm wondering what drew you to this work on a personal level, and what kind of insights have you had about the nature of anti-Semitism from doing this kind of work over so many years, and our ability to combat it in a meaningful way?
It's a great question. It really goes back to without the long, boring narrative. In my formative teenage years, our family moved to East Tennessee, where the Jewish community is smaller, but part of this very cohesive network of small Jewish communities that are so very active and so solidified. I was immediately swept up in the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, BBYO. That was my world during high school. And continuing on, I had in my college years the opportunity to experience Israel for the first time. And I always had this impulse to be involved in community relations work and to do things in a volunteer public way. And fortunately, I stumbled into the Anti-Defamation League and did not realize until my first job that one could actually work for that organization. It wasn't simply a volunteer organization. I spent 21 years with the ADL, had remarkable mentors along the way, had stints in Miami, San Francisco, the longest of which was in Chicago, and then moved into had this remarkable opportunity to build the Illinois Holocaust Museum and partner with J.B. Pritzker, who brought me to the project and is now the second term governor of the state of Illinois, and just an extraordinary human being and leader. And then the story continues, leading me ultimately to AJC. I will tell you that after now, I have to correct my bio, it's actually 40 years in this field, in this business. I can say it now without sort of choking on the number. I think that so many of my mentors and wonderful colleagues that I had the joy of learning from and growing from, who have left this earth, would be turning in their graves to see where we are a few decades later. Just the rank base anti-Semitism that is out there in the world, and it's frustrating and a bit frightening to me. Know that here we are. I've 40 years invested in this work, and I know we've made progress. I know we have moved the needle in so many ways, but in other ways, I feel like we're, if not back at square one, it's a reminder to me that this is an eternal struggle. We have to bring eternal vigilance to this struggle. We can never take our foot off the accelerator. And as I said at the outset, Anti-Semitism is a pervasive, toxic force that finds its way to the forefront in all sorts of societies. Our job is to call it out, to recognize it, to push back, to enlist allies, and to keep fighting the good fight.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, someone asked me, they had an experience with their child who said someone said something very anti-Semitic to their child, and they didn't know what to tell them. How do you respond to, I don't know if there is a universal response to this, but when faced with a one-on-one anti-Semitic situation, do you have any advice for how people can respond in a way that promotes some sense of a positive image of Jews to the world, or to this person who's said something to you, like Jewing you down or something like that?
Of course. Well, first of all, it's very, very difficult in the moment to muster a response that is not that does not come across as angry or too emotionally charged. It can be very, very difficult to do that, but sometimes it requires it. If there's an opportunity, if this is a situation with a child and perhaps another child who was perceived to be a friend or an acquaintance, there is a teachable moment that presents itself there. There is always the opportunity to circle back and to talk about it in a rational way, to sort of unpack that moment and why, to try to convey why that was hurtful to their child, to involve parents in that effort, and to use this as a way to educate and hopefully to prevent what could be a recurrence if it was left untouched or unchallenged. And I think that's always those moments never go away, and those hurts can always, for the most part, be undone, or at least addressed, which is the most important thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. And with adults, it's a little more complicated because you're challenging them to examine their own thoughts and what lies below the surface. Sometimes they're not even aware. Anyway, I want to thank you, Rick, because this has really, really been meaningful. And I know we have a lot of people out there who probably have other questions, and I want to give some time to allowing those questions to be heard. So I want to, at this point, just thank you again, and Susan Morgenstern, Kate Zental, for the performance of Magid. And as always, a big thank you to Daphna Scholl, who's our Zoom master, because I'm now going to turn it over to her to field the questions that I'm sure are well in the chat room. So over to you, Daphna.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. So yes, we definitely got quite a few questions in the chat. Please feel free to continue chatting me, and I will do my best to field as many questions as I can. We got a question about a fear about how the younger generation has kind of been lost and swept up in a mentality about Jewish people, and particularly the way that social media and not seeing people face to face has really made it difficult to combat that. So how do we counteract this narrative that a lot of younger people have received, and how do we humanize Jewish people and sort of clarify our points on history with them? What is your advice about that?
First of all, I also just wanted to thank Lisa and everybody for the opportunity. I want to make sure I get the chance to say that what a joy and a privilege it is to be with all of you today.
It's our honor. Thank you.
This is a very tough question, and in many ways, this is the proverbial $64,000 question of our time. And if, in fact, most young people, as studies have shown, are receiving their news information, the news feed, and digesting information from sources like TikTok, we have some real work to do. I saw a job posting come across my desk within AJC, an internal posting, that we are hiring a TikTok coordinator as part of our social media team. I had to do a double take at that posting because I thought maybe it was a Purim spiel or something when it first came by. But no, it's the real deal, because we have to meet the generation today where they are and try to bring information to them through the modalities that they use, that they are most comfortable with. And that means putting better information out there, trying to reach them, enlisting, I used the term earlier, social media influencers. We've been doing that with Hollywood types and others since October 7 and a little bit before then. We have to continue to do that. And we have to try to open people's minds. And this is not the work of a day. It's going to take some time before we build some critical mass. And I do think we have to take a fresh look at how we teach about the Middle East, how we impart the history of the conflict, how we distinguish between, again, the evil of Hamas that unless this threat is eliminated, will come calling for the rest of us. That's the real, I should have said earlier, that's the veil, forgive me, that has been lifted in the aftermath of October 7. This was not merely is not the right word, a horrific attack upon our brothers and sisters in Israel. This was a clarion call of death and murder, attacking and targeting Jews the world over. That, I think, is what is underpinning the fear that so many of us feel. And that's where we have to continue to be, to put our stock and our faith in the institutions of democracy. But in terms of young people, we have to meet them where they are. And we have to get on those platforms and become expert in those platforms as well.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Another patron would like to know if there's any particular reading or material, books that you recommend that would be helpful to meet the current moment.
That's a great question. I would encourage everyone to log on to the AJC website. I know our LA link will be shared at the end, but just ajc.org. There is a lot of really good material. I can't say books necessarily because everything is so fast moving and evolving, but there's just a lot of good resource material, talking points, backgrounders, explainers that you should feel free to download, to share. This is, I actually think this is, I've had the privilege of working for AJC for about 4.5 years now. I think these last 4 months have been the organization's shining moment in the aftermath of this crisis. And in terms of our advocacy, in terms of, I should share, I don't know if you can see it here, I'm actually wearing a Bring Them Home Now hostage hostage t-shirt, as well as the dog tag and the yellow ribbon, because it has been 108 days and there are more than 100 hostages believed to be still alive, more than 130 total. I've just shared with you a very ugly reality that seems to be universally understood. Not all are alive, but all need to be brought home. This is fundamentally a crime against humanity, and anyone who calls for ceasefire cannot do so legitimately or justifiably without anchoring that call in a plea for the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages being held in Gaza. I needed to say that, and thank you for indulging.
People would like to know how to get involved. What's something action-oriented that they can do to help the Jewish community?
The very first thing, there's a lot that can be done, and just to go one step further on the comment I just made, tomorrow morning, and I know there's a shelf life for this recording, but we are doing this on January 21st. So on January 22nd, Monday morning, call your congressperson, call the office. You may get a recording, you may get a staff legislative aid. Lodge your firm plea for the release of the hostages. That is something that will resonate. It will make a difference, because increasingly we will see in the weeks ahead mounting pressure upon Israel to come to some longer term pause, my term, to the conflict. And it may very well come at the cost of not defanging Hamas or the threat of Hezbollah from the north that needs to be undone. I had the privilege of being in Israel 2 weeks ago. It was a very quick trip. I was there for 5 days, and I was there to show up really in solidarity, to get my hands dirty a little bit, spent half a day in the fields picking sweet potatoes and got muddy and dirty, but felt like I was doing something, and also just to not get in the way. Being there mattered. And I think the one takeaway that so many Israelis across the board, whatever the political persuasion might be, pro-Netanyahu, anti-Netanyahu, whatever it might be, was the following. There is an absolute befuddlement at the degree to which so many otherwise enlightened, educated people in America and other Western nations fail to fully grasp the threat to all of civilization that Hamas poses. And for Israelis, they simply couldn't understand it. They feel the support of America. They love President Biden. That's not a political comment. It's simply a fact of how they are feeling, and the support of Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin and across the board. Thank God for America and the support for Israel. But there is just a sense that too many people don't understand the existential threat that Hamas poses. And so each of us need to raise our voices and put it out there and make sure that our elected officials are hearing it.
Thank you. My last question for you is, how are you doing personally? Obviously, this is a lot of work, and I know that I can only imagine, one of the most overwhelming times. What are you doing to find some joy in your life and to feel grounded?
Well, thank you for the question. I'll tell you again that AJC has been very good in understanding the emotional toll upon its rank and file. We're an organization of 250 employees, but we're amplified, and we're a much more impactful organization because of the thousands of wonderful people who participate and vote with their feet and are generous with their pocketbook. All of that matters. For me, it's very odd to have to say this, but in some respects, I feel like this is a moment that all of the experiences that I've been privileged to have over these 4 decades prepared me for. It's a God forbid moment that has arrived. And so I have been doing my utmost to do whatever I can round the clock to be an advocate, to be a source of good information, to be a defender, to enlist good people in the struggle, and to make our voices heard. It's I don't sleep great, but that's a small price to pay. Part of the joy, and I'll share with all of you, if you don't have if you have obviously Wi-Fi, radio.net is one of the sort of a portal to radio stations around the world. And I listen to the Galgalatz radio station. It's in Hebrew. It's a beautiful station. And even if you're not as familiar with Hebrew, you'll feel it. You'll understand it. There are songs being dedicated to hostages in Gaza. There are family members coming on and saying, here's a favorite song of my son or daughter or my parent or my uncle. It's, to me, it just continues to create that connection that we are one global Jewish family. And we felt it very, very profoundly in this last week when we had hosted in LA in early December family members of 2 hostages in Gaza. And one of them, a 38-year-old man named Itai Svirsky, his cousins, sisters, Ophir and Naama Weinberg, put their lives on hold to go anywhere they could in the world to talk about Itai and to talk about what a gentle and kind soul he is, and to do everything they could to implore leaders to raise their voices, to exert that clarion call to bring him home. Tragically, we learned earlier this week that Itai was murdered in captivity, and we mourn, and we feel as though we've lost a beautiful cousin as well. And I think we have to continue to make this personal for all of us, because we really are in this together. Never have I felt that sense of unity. Excuse me, that sense of unity as a global Jewish community as I have in these recent months.
Isn't that a beautiful thing out of all the tragedy? Well, Rick, thank you so much for being here and speaking with us. We really appreciate it. It was a really insightful and important conversation. So thank you.
Thank you again.
And I want to thank Lisa and Susan. And I just want to let people know about a few things coming up and then also that are happening now at the Braid before you check out. So if you have not seen I Loved You, I Loved You Not, that is our first salon show of the season. It is currently running. We are selling out very fast. So I highly recommend going online and getting your tickets. If you haven't already, you can also still subscribe. We have our 3-show subscription for those shows that have not been performed yet. And we also have a 2-show subscription for the rest of the season. So check out our website and you'll find all the information there. And I just wanted to make a quick note that if you are a Temple Isaiah member, I wanted to clarify that this event is separate from our show on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. at Temple Isaiah, where the ADL will be speaking in a post-show Q&A at the end. So hopefully that clarifies things if there was any confusion. We did post the AJC link in the chat, so please feel free to check out all of their important work that they're doing. And if you bought a ticket or made a donation for this event, we just want to say thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. It's because of your support that we are able to continue having these incredible Sunday with the Braid events. So thank you so much. And with that said, I'm gonna say goodbye. I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday, and we will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.